Now, this tower wasn't so much trying to get into outer space. Okay? Excuse me, that's not necessarily what they were trying to do. They were trying to get their leader, get Nimrod into the position of God. If you look at this as let us build a tower that may reach heavens, the word heaven there actually means it could refer to the abode of stars, but it also refers to the abode of God. See, Nimrod wasn't trying to get up there with the stars. He was trying to reach, and this, some people that kind of a little bit on the fringe of this, they'll tell you that there was some tampering of space time, not space time, but interdimensional travel and so forth. If you saw Stargate back in the 90s, this was one of the things that they entertained in that without a biblical platform that they didn't use. But some people think this is one of the things they could do. And remember, Canaan in this same area uncovered teachings of falling angels. So what, we can't really limit what the knowledge of an angel is, let alone a fallen angel. So there's a lot of stuff that's been going on here, but the bottom line is, no matter how you view this text, what was happening, they were trying to get Nimrod, his leader, and place him into the heavens. Now notice, I want to share something with you. Very clever men, very, very, very clever men throughout history, they have kind of helped set the stage where people would love and adore them and bring them to a position where God would, excuse me, not where God, but where the people would elevate them to a position of Godhead. Osiris, we looked at him several months ago. Osiris was actually a real man according to the book of Jasher. His father was Enam, and you can read about him in Genesis chapter 10, the Table of Nations. Enam or Enamits, the Ananim, not the Anakim, but the Ananim, which was a son and the children of Egypt, of Egypt, which was the son of Ham. Sorry about that. Okay, but I want to share something with you. They wanted to build a name for themselves. Now, I'm about to get a little political here, okay? A little bit political. Check this out. Now, I'm not going to name names or nothing, but listen to this. One of the biggest things that Nimrod tried to do as a politician and the head of the current government. Governments, usually certain factions or parties, if you will, and government have all throughout the 20th century, they have always had a great influence over the young adults and so forth. And I want to give you some quotes here because a lot of times we think that there was just slavery at the Tower of Babel and everybody just wanted to go home. That's not necessarily the case, I don't think. Listen to this. This is one quote. This Vladimir Lenin, who was a socialist and one of the people that was very strong in the United Socialist Soviet Republic. I believe that's what it was, the USSR, for many years before it became Russia again. This is what he had to say: "Give me just one generation of Ruth, and I'll transform the whole world." Again, they're targeting the youth. Listen to this: "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." This is, now I'm not saying that you're stupid if you're under 30. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that you have to be very careful because there are politicians out there that will manipulate you simply because you're young. And with all due respect, hey Rich, good to have you here, buddy. There's politicians out there that will simply manipulate the young because, and hey, I'm going to say it, but I was there too. I'm almost 55, but I was 20 at one time. I was 18. The politicians, some of them out there, they will literally target the youth. Why? The youth lack one thing that everybody else has: experience. Okay, and if you got kids out there in high school that are flunking history, if they're not being taught history, then they're going to get sideswiped with a lot of stuff that's going on, not just in America but in the world today. And so we have to be very careful about this. And keep in mind, the Tower of Babel, it was built. It took about 50 years before God came down and destroyed it. And can you imagine, think about this, man, can you imagine if you had 50 years to rule over a population? There's no such thing as a 50-year-old child. I mean, I want to give you an example of something that happened in my life, in my family. When I got out of the Navy back in '92, I spent about a year here in Anniston, Alabama, before I moved down to Florida to be with my mom and be with my other family parts down there, as grandmother and so forth. And what happened while I was down there, I bought a house. Now, let me tell you what happened. Not 50 years, but in just 30 years. Let me tell you what happened. In that 30 years, my sister had a son. A few years later, she had a daughter. my niece and nephew. By the time I got back up here, and it's only been about 30 years, my niece and nephew have gone from being newborn, fully grown. They've graduated high school. They've gone through college, or my niece has, and now they've all got kids. When I went to Florida, in one generation, within 30 years, what happened? My baby sister went from being my baby sister to being a grandmother 3 times over. That was in about 30 years. Can you imagine how Nimrod and his henchmen, if you his government, if you will, the influence they could think about this? There would have been people that would have been born. Their parents would have said, "He conquered us, he destroyed us, he took us down, he enslaved us." But there's going to be another generation saying, "He had government funds for us. He took care of us. He looked after us. Maybe my parents don't get this. Maybe my grandparents don't get this. But Nimrod really wasn't that bad of a guy. Look at all the good stuff he's done for the community." And so, if we look at that from a perspective of history, then we get, we can get it out. By the way, let me ask you something. I'm sure everybody in here has heard that when, no matter if you believe that they refuse to branch out across the world or what, is irrelevant at this point. Let me ask you something. If you had a man that totally conquered and destroyed you and enslaved you, in 50 years, if he let you go back home, would you? We'll see you, Liz. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Do you think that you would all of a sudden just start worshiping his gods, picking up his manifesto? Do you think you'd start going along with it? Absolutely not. But what about the youth? What about the youth that was growing up under this political regime? Everybody that's a young adult, they grow up thinking that their life, their young life, their teen and early adult years was the greatest. Everybody does it. Could it be that the youth that was growing up under Nimrod, they began to love and adore him? Hitler was adored by people coming up of age. They thought he was great. He did a lot of good stuff for Germany. Didn't work out so good for the world. But think about this for a minute. This is exactly where we are. This is where Nimrod came. So this is the rise of Nimrod we've been looking at tonight. The rise of Nimrod, and looking at how he began to come over and take over. Now, listen to me. I want to share something with you. I'm going to read from the Antiquities of the Jews. I've shared a little bit about that tonight. Let me come back over here. I've shared from the Antiquities of the Jews a little bit tonight. I want to read to you from Book 1, Chapter 4, Section 2. I know it's a lot to take in, but if you ever get a copy of the Antiquities of the Jews, I guarantee you're going to love it. Let's go there, and I want to share with you something, what Nimrod did. Nimrod, okay, so we got to go to chapter 4, excuse me. There's chapter 4, and I'm going to section 2. Listen to this. Verse 114a. Listen. He, meaning Nimrod, also gradually changed the government into tyranny. Now, wait a minute. Did you catch that word? Gradually. He did it subtlety. He did it very subtle. Now, listen to this. He used subtlety, and he gradually changed the government into tyranny. That means, as a prototype of the Antichrist, he didn't just come on the scene snarling and taking female slaves and killing babies and raping women. That's not what he did. It was slowly and it was gradual. Now listen to this. He did this, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into constant dependence upon his power. He also said he would excuse me. He also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. A lot went into that text, but did you notice that? He subtly changed the government into tyranny. I'm not going to be honest with you. Another political statement I'm going to say. Okay, it's my program. I'll throw it out there, and we'll see what happens. I have seen in the past 40 years, since I was a teenager, I have seen our country slowly slide downhill. You know, there's people nowadays that they don't even know what the 50s was like. I wasn't there for the 50s. You know, in the 60s and 70s, we started having a lot of social and political and spiritual upheavals. We had sexual revolution. The 80s, things kind of seemed to stabilize a little bit, but they were still kind of wild. But, you know, we got people who will never know the subtlety of what we had that was so good back in the 80s and how it was, under presidents like President Reagan and so forth. And I know at that time I couldn't stand Reagan, but then again, you know why? That's because I was young and I was a Democrat. And I'm not trying to pick on the Democrats, and don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that there's certain. It goes back to what I was teaching about how the Democrats will target younger people and the youth. So you have to be very careful about that, because it's important that you have a voice, but you have to be properly trained in that to make a good decision. And when our schools are no longer teaching history, then we got a serious problem in this country. Why would you not want to know the history? Because you don't want to know how things fell apart in nations and how they rise to power and how they fall. You don't want to know that. Any government that doesn't want to teach you that, you got to look out after. You got to watch yourself with them, because they're pulling something. Anyway, notice what he said. He did it by subtlety, but guess what? Why was he subtle? Because he said that there was no other way to bring the people of that time under a complete reliance of Nimrod and do what? Forsake God. We're getting close to wrap up here. I want to share something with you. This is 2 Corinthians, people. 2 Corinthians. Paul is saying something really profound here. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3. Look what it says. No, that's 1 Corinthians. They need to space these Corinthians out a little bit. Okay, look at what 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3 says. This is Paul speaking to the church at Corinth, which was a very carnal church. But I fear lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled or tricked or seduced Eve, you ready? Through his subtlety, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity in Christ. Wow, did you catch that? You know, if you go over to, let me see, where is that? Psalms 11:3, or is it Proverbs 11:3? I want to make sure I got that right. I get Psalms and Proverbs confused sometimes. Psalms, let's take a look at that. Psalms, I want to make sure I'm giving you the right verse. Psalms 11, yep, Psalm 11:3. Look what it says. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? This is exactly what happened with Nimrod. He was very subtle, he was very careful, and he knew what he was doing. He knew it was going to take some time. He couldn't get mom and dad, he couldn't get grandma and grandpa together, but he could get the children and slowly turn them into followers of Nimrod instead of followers of God. This is the rise of Nimrod. This is how the Tower of Babel was created, how it was built. And so, I hope this is a good breaking spot. We're going to continue next week. We're going to continue to look at what happened at the Tower of Babel. We're going to look at who was in charge of the religion. Who was in charge of this false religion at the Tower of Babel? If you've read this book, which I've been trying to read it for a while now, the two Babylons, or the papal worship, proved to be the worship of Nimrod and his wife, which would have been Semiramis. This is written by Reverend Alexander Hislop. It's got a lot of good information in it, but I do disagree with him on one key thing. We're going to look at who is in charge of religion next week at the Tower of Babel. Who was it? Was it Semiramis, the alleged queen of Ninus, who is believed to be, according to Eusebius, he's believed to be the same as Nimrod in the Bible, he's the king of Assyria. What was going on there? Is it Semiramis? Is she really the one that corrupted all the religions? We're going to get into that next week. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be honest with you. The weeks go by so fast. I can't wait to take a look, see what's going on here next week. We're going to look into the lifestyle of the Tower of Babel, and we're also going to look at what's going on next week as we see the rise of Semiramis and look at her connections to what's been going on in the future and how the Semiramis could be around still today as the spirit of Jezebel in a narcissistic religion. We're going to take a look at that next week. Thank y'all for tuning in. Thanks, Rich. Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate y'all's input there. I'm going to see y'all next week. So remember, this is Michael Champion saying, I'll see y'all here, there, or in the air. God bless y'all. I'll see y'all later. Thank you for tuning in.